Having something that's perfectly placed in the middle is almost too on the nose, it's almost too perfect. Something that may help with that is actually reading the poem backwards. When we start doing some time travel, when we start, adding entire seasons or years, what tends to happen is we can actually start diluting. What are the keys to story when it comes to our own poems? Today we're taking a look at Gregory Orr's essay, titled 4 Temperaments and the Forms of Poetry. It's a longer work. We're going to be focusing on an element targeting story, and he's referencing Aristotle. And basically he's saying that stories, some key components that they need to have is that stories need to have action and event. So we need to target those specific moments. This is where poetry can really shine, whereas other forms of writing versus fiction, they may get kind of caught up in adding elements of the world and some of the background details. A poem has that urgency just in relation to space, where trying to really home in on what is the actual action that is occurring, what is the actual event that situates the poem. Those are going to be key for us. Additionally, a dramatic focus on a single action. One of the things that we see a lot in poems is that they tend to want to take place in a very restrained amount of time. When we start doing some time travel, when we start, adding entire seasons or years, what tends to happen is we can actually start diluting what is occurring in the poem, which then can make the piece a lot less impactful. So it can be very helpful for us to instead, when we're having a piece, have it focus on a single dramatic action or moment in time. Another element of poetry that Aristotle identifies that poems need to have an important sequence, right? In terms of the start, the middle, and the end. And that's not to say that necessarily they need to occur in that order, but whatever order the poem decides to be in, it needs to occur in such a way that if you switch any of the pieces, any of the component parts, then the poem starts to fall apart. Everything needs to be structured in a way that makes logical sense for that specific piece. We can't just be flipping sequences around in most cases. Something that we see a lot in poets' work, I see this a lot in workshopping. I do have to give a quick shout out to Tracy Morris, who used this a lot at the Cave Canem workshops. Is something that can happen is you write a poem and you might think, something about this piece is a little bit off. Something that may help with that is actually reading the poem backwards. So for instance, starting from the last line and then moving up towards the first line. You might need to adjust some of the grammar, some of the vocab a little bit, but trying that out may help reveal some inner tensions of the poem that in the original order it was written in maybe are lacking some of that energy or maybe lacking some of that urgency. So that's a strategy that perhaps can help you identify that, hey, maybe the sequencing that I have in my piece is wrong, is maybe not serving the poem. We don't, again, want to have a situation in general where, if I move this line up here, if I move this entire section of the poem up here, it doesn't make a huge difference. Those things should be significant in terms of the impact of a piece. Another aspect of story that Aristotle highlights is trying to find beauty in the harmony of proportion. What is this proportion? I think to my days, so I'm an ESL teacher, and we had to do a lot of research writing with students because a lot of times they were working on their very first essays. They may not have been used to writing in a Western context. What we see with essay writing in particular is we need to make sure our argumentation feels a little bit balanced. What can happen sometimes is you see this student that writes this super long body paragraph. So one element of the argument is getting a lot of attention, but then later arguments, especially tends to happen towards the end, those arguments only get a couple of lines of information and explanation. That's not a very balanced essay. So we want to, I'll rephrase, an exercise that I find to be pretty helpful with poems or any piece of writing is to just kind of start off by giving it the eye test. Where are the sections of a poem that aren't doing what is happening elsewhere? And is that shift intentional or not? In general, you're going to expect to see pieces that are staying relatively consistent with maybe minor breaks that can signify a turn or a change. In general, though, there's still going to be a balance. Having a poem that spends half of the poem just kind of setting up back information and then a turn that occurs in the very last line or close to the end, that's not a very balanced poem. I will say that typically when we're thinking about turns or voltas, usually this is happening right around that 2/3 mark, because I think that speaks to a little bit of tension. Having something that's perfectly placed in the middle is almost too on the nose, it's almost too perfect. Whereas that 2/3 mark gives us enough time to establish what is at stake for the speaker, and then the subversion can happen. Speaking of turns, this is something that Aristotle also mentions as well with regards to the pivot, the importance of having a moment of discovery or also potentially a reversal. That change, that twist is what allows the story to really come alive and to carry some significance for our readers. After exploring a bit about Aristotle's views on story, Gregory then moves on to discuss a little bit about what are some central ways that we can add tension and conflict into our stories. And a lot of this kind of boils down to the relationship of two. He gives an example from Thomas Wyatt. There's a poem from They Flee From Me. And the very opening line of that poem is this: they flee from me that sometime did me seek. This immediately has a couple elements of tension to it that again are based on duality. We have the they versus a me. We have a sense of fleeing versus seeking. A present moment, they flee from me, versus a habitual past, sometime did me seek. So all of these parallels are what helps create a tension immediately. This is the very first line, and immediately we're introduced to 3, 4, 5 different levels of tension in the poem. We can find more examples of this. Really, anytime you bring together two elements, it can naturally create a conversation among them and some tension between them. For instance, if we just add in, for instance, apples and oranges. Comparing apples to oranges, what that does is your listener or your reader automatically starts looking for things that are similar, but also differences. Some that's also just based on the idiomatic nature of it. We've heard this phrase before. We can see this also with characters like we saw with the Thomas Wyatt poem, where we have a they versus a me. We can have it even from emotional levels. So for instance, compare an expression of passion versus an expression of ambivalence. Having a character who has strong feelings towards another character and another character who doesn't reciprocate. Not that maybe they even hate the other person, but they just really don't care. And lastly, pretty much like we've been mentioning before, characters. And in fact, Gregory Orr even goes on to mention the triad between father, mother, and child. Family dynamics are immediately going to add aspects of tension and conflict into a poem, into a story. Towards the end of the section on story, Gregory Orr has this to say, this particular line: story is the embodied truth of contraries seeking resolution. And I think that when you look at even these dynamics that we created here, you can see the tensions that automatically are trying to be resolved. The apple and the orange are trying to find things in common, but ultimately they can't. The they and the me, ultimately there's going to be a separation. They're doing one thing, I'm doing something else. Otherwise, it would become a we. There's the passion versus the ambivalence. The passion wanting one thing, the ambivalence not able to capture that same emotion. And then anytime you have characters. One thing I'd also like to add, this again in reference to a point that I reference a lot from our workshop on the art of subtext, a work by Charles Baxter that's especially focused on drama and fiction, but that can be applied to poetry too. One way to automatically add a little bit of tension to your story is to confine space. So the fact that people are limited, maybe wanting to escape, but being unable to because they're trapped in a hallway, trapped in a room, trapped in a closet, trapped in an elevator. So situations like that can automatically enhance the tension that can be introduced by just having two characters together. You know, when I was reading this essay, one poem that immediately came to mind for me was Robert Hayden's Those Winter Sundays. And in fact, it actually got a shout out. I read over it. I completely missed it when I was making notes for this workshop. But that poem, Hayden's poem, actually does get referenced as well. So I'm glad that Gregory Orr and myself were kind of thinking along the same lines in terms of poems. And pretty much every single line here is adding elements of tension, just to kind of walk through some of them. So again, this is the poem Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. Sundays 2. So just that all automatically. Sundays 2 is separating Sunday from the rest of the week, but it's also allowing it to join in as well. But Sunday is also made special, right? Sundays 2. So we could have just said every day of the week, but no, we're separating Sunday from the others, and we're not even mentioning them, right? My father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue, black, cold. We're getting a little bit of separation from characters, right? We have the my, which is just the speaker, and then we have the father, who is not the same person. Also in terms of behavior, it almost seems to be implying that the my, the speaker, the me, isn't doing what the father is doing. Then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather. So there's this awareness of what the father is doing, what the father's hands were like. There potentially could be a disconnect. We don't know what the speaker's hands are like, but perhaps they're not the same, right? There's also this separation, kind of the disembodiment to a degree. With cracked hands that ached. It doesn't say with his cracked hands. It doesn't say with my cracked hands. So it's just implied that they're the father's, but by removing that pronoun, again, you're creating this separation as well. From labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. Again, we get this contrast. So the weekday weather versus the weekend. This is Sunday. So we have these contrasts with time going on. No one ever thanked him. We have the separation between the no one or everyone else and the him, the father. There's this disconnect between the two of them. There's this no one ever thanked him. So there's this idea of thanking, but then there's the idea of not thanking. So the fact that it's not being carried over. This is just the very first stanza of the poem, but so many elements of story are already here. Especially with regards to the characters, with regards to, I would say, the role of time. You know, to start, we're in that start. We're setting all the groundwork for things that happen later on in the poem. We're trying to paint the father in a particular way. Also, the dramatic focus on a single action that Aristotle mentioned. It's talking about Sundays, but because all the Sundays were very similar, is almost concentrated on a single day at the same time. So that can be also an example, I think, of how to use time in a way that covers a broad spectrum while also being very narrow. So what can we do in terms of next steps for our own stories and poems? Well, something that I would encourage you to do, this is again something that I think haiku and short form poetry play with very well. We have several workshops about haiku and the connection between the first image and the second, and the disbalance that happens because haiku tend to be 3 lines. So you end up with this sequence that very often is 2 lines dedicated to one topic, 1 line dedicated to the comparison topic, or the opposite, 1 line for the comparison and then 2. So if you're trying to practice this element of tension automatically created by binaries and just putting 2 things together, I encourage you to check out that haiku workshop right here.